this video is to explain to you how a contractor can automate his health and safety file and use it for all the sites that he's possibly working on. So the idea is to automate the file and keep the company-specific documentation available to be used instead of buying a file with duplicate documentation and printing every time you use a site or need to do work on a site. So the Novo Group is doing mostly renovations, a little bit of plumbing and a little bit of electrical work. And they go into, say, for instance, a shopping mall, a house and home, and they do the demolition of the dry walls and, breaking up the tiles, and somebody else comes in and do the fitting of the shop fitting. So that's the type of work they do. Now, they need a health and safety file for almost every project that they work on. And we've automated their health and safety file so that they don't have to pay for 3 health and safety files. They only pay for the license fee in Elint and use the same documentation as what we have done here, and also use the same checklists and tracking their performance against every single project that they're working in. What is also what we've seen the benefit of using the system as well is that even if the contract doesn't require a health and safety file, the discipline is there so that we still use the health and safety file principle to make sure that they comply to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Section 8 specifically. So that if something happens on site, they have all the documentation, they have done their checklist, and the discipline is there. People are not just using a ladder and not doing a checklist. They're actually doing their checklist because it's now part of the way they do business. Another nice to have is that because your file is secure online and it's protected with password protection, so only the person that's got access to the system can actually open the documentation. Now your documentation is protected according to the POPI Act. Currently, if you go onto a construction site, I can put on my safety manager bib and I can walk onto a construction site. Nobody will ask me anything. I can go into the office, open a file, have access to medicals, IDs, telephone numbers, very sensitive information of the company numbers, CK documents, all of that. Nobody will ask me for anything. They will just allow me to have a look at the file. And that is a big concern when it comes to the POPI Act. With Elint, that the information is not available. It's available on request, and you can ask the person who they are, and then based on that, make a decision if you're going to allow them to see the documentation or not. So that is just some of the nice to haves by using Elint. Then also take note, we have been audited by the Department of Labour. They've inspected some of the sites Novo work on, as well as other clients that's using the Elint system for their safety files, as well as a principal contractor that's currently using the system for health and safety for all their contractors on a specific site. Department of Labour does not have a problem with the electronic system. The legislation doesn't say that it must be a printed file on site. It only says the file must be on site, irrespective of the actual format. And that's been put in writing by the Department of Labour for us. And also, it must be authenticated. So we can show authentication by electronic signatures as well as manual signatures on checklists and so forth. So please take note. It's been accepted by the Department of Labour, and industry is accepting it more and more and more. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is obviously create a company profile. Once you've created the company profile, you're going to create a site. And I'm calling this site the health and safety file because this site will only be used, and this is an Elint site, not a construction site, not a geographical site. This is an Elint access site. So it's my Elint license that I'm now calling HSE file because I'm automating my HSE file for this business. So Please make sure you look at our tutorials on how to do the actual capturing and how to open a company and all of that. Every module that I'm going to go through, I'm just going to follow the flow. I'm not going to explain how to do it. You need to go and have a look at the tutorials for every module if you want to see the how to. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that everybody that is working on the Novo file actually does have access. So I know Dean, for instance, he is a project manager, so he's got full access to the file. But I also know that Andre was one of the safety managers on a project that audited the Novo file. So we gave him access for the period of time that Novo worked on their site so that he could have access to the file and audit it. He was also allowed to download some of the information for his records before we closed his access. So you can provide access for your clients, health and safety people, to do audits if you want to. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have a risk assessment. Now, the risk assessment is the backbone of everything we do in health and safety. So we want to make sure our risk assessment is actually applicable to what we do. So you will see on the Novo file, we have general construction work, we will have electrical work, we've got plumbing. They used a scissor lift in one of their projects, so we created that risk assessment template for them. And then obviously they've worked in a ceiling, I think it was about 8 meters off the ground. So I created that risk assessment for them based on the specifications that we received. So you will see the risk assessment template covers everything that they do. So we try to put everything that's possibly the risk that's possibly going to be exposed to, we put it in our template. Once we created our templates, we can go to the front end because everything else we do, we're going to do in the front end. So we've got the company profile. We've linked our users to the profile. We created the template of the risk assessment. So now what I want to do is I want to make sure that I create a health and safety file. So with everything else that we do, we create the documentation because you can't get away from the documentation. You create your documentation, your policies, you get it signed, and you upload it in Elint. Once the document is uploaded, you'll see I've got a HSE policy template and I've got the signed copy. So once we uploaded the signed copy, the next time we need to review it, I'll probably just review the template, get it signed, and then I will upload the signed copy. This is a disciplinary code which have been signed. So, but that's your file. So you create your file, and you'll see I called it Novo Group Check Plan and File. Now, what we have in this file is every single document that's applicable to the HSE file, irrespective of where they go to site. So this would be their company documentation, their company letter of good standing, their company HSE plan or check plan, because these guys are doing the same work every site they're going to. The only thing that will change is the conditions of the site that might change a few things. So everything else is loaded here as the standard way of doing business. So they work procedures. They work with a grinder on one site and they work with a grinder on another site. The risks are the same, unless if they work in a flammable area, maybe. But the procedure, what they follow, is exactly the same. So that's the company file. Then what we do is obviously we get a specific project. So you will see these are the different projects that they receive. So for every project that they're working on, we will open a folder and load project specific information in. So if we go back to the risk assessment, because your risk assessment might change from site to site based on the conditions of the site. So let's take a simple thing. You might work inside a shopping mall in a building on a ladder doing painting work. Okay? The next project, you do exactly the same. You work from a ladder doing painting, but now it's outside. So the risk might change because of the condition that's changed. So what we do is we take the template and then we'll have a look and see what is applicable in this template for that specific project. You'll see some of them are ticked and some of them are not ticked. So you will see all the ticks and those that are unticked. So if I say, well, there is a possibility that somebody can come intoxicated to work, I can add this specific risk. And that's maybe just because of the area. They might be working in a sensitive, area with a shebeen next to the area that they're working with. And then what I do is I take that specific risk assessment, which I've just reviewed in line with the specifications for the client, and I PDF it. Now, once I've PDF'd it, I save it with the site-specific name, and then I upload it under the site-specific file. So here you can see I've done that. So on this site, they had general construction work as well as electrical as well as plumbing. And that risk assessment came from our templates that we work with. So you will see this Bertha site, there's their 372 agreement, their monitoring reports that we normally issue for them, the site audits and the spec. What I also do to understand the specific site is I've got a generic cover page. You would remember in this section here, we called it cover page. This is an open template. So I expect the site manager to fill in the cover page for every single project they're going to work on. Because that cover page will tell me who's the people that's going to be on site. They tell me if there's any contractors that they're going to include on site. They tell me what risks are on site, and they tell me what is the scope of work for that site. So that document's important for me to understand as the administrator of their file if there's anything I need to do differently. So for instance, where I had the scissor lift risk assessment, I had to add this because on the cover page, they told me they're going to work at heights, and they said we're going to use a scissor lift. So I knew working at heights is in the general construction template, but the scissor lift wasn't there. So I needed to add that specific risk assessment to make sure that we actually have everything in place. And that's how they use their file. Now, obviously, in their company file, there's some aspects that might expire. So, like your letter of good standing. So, for everything that we need to review or anything that will have an expiry date, we created a CMS. So, if we go to their file, you will say, you'll see, according to the OSHAC, there's certain things that needs to be done. And there's certain things that needs to be in place, like their letter of good standing. So their letter of good standing expires next year, May. It was monthly. We changed it to yearly. Actually needs to change that to yearly. It used to be monthly because they paid monthly, and then they caught up with their payments, and it became yearly. So I just need to change that. But the system will notify the user, listen, you need to update your letter of good standing on the 31st of May next year. Here you can see legal appointments that needs to be updated June next year. The legal appointments, what we have done is Because this is a construction company, that's all they do. They just do renovations. And they've appointed 3 different site supervisors that's responsible for sites. They can have multiple sites, and they can have multiple sites in 1 month. We are not appointing them as construction supervisors for every single site. We've appointed them as construction supervisors for Novo. So it doesn't matter which site they go to, they are a construction supervisor at that point in time, because their appointment within the business is construction manager. So they would be the construction manager. If we have construction supervisors that might change, we do appointments for them, and that will be loaded under that specific profile for that business that we do. Also, our checklists are done by specific people that was appointed in the business, and they are appointed as, for instance, the accident investigator is the accident investigator across the board. The risk assessor is the risk assessor across the board. The 16.2 is the 16.2 across the board. The as I said, the management is the construction managers are the across the board. The supervisors might change from project to project, so there we do a specific appointment. And if we do have a supervisor, we might appoint them as the inspector for ladders. But our construction managers are also the inspectors of ladders, of portable electrical equipment, and all of that. So they do all of that in one, because the business is not that big. Sometimes we only have 2 or 3 people on site, and these guys are doing the risk assessment. So that's the appointments. That's why we don't do it per project. For instance, we do it per company. So you can see this is the actual file, the specific file, and that's the compliance against their own file. And then these would be the projects. So if we go into, you can see. So Kings is the principal contractor. And if you look at it, they've been appointed by Kings for 2 different projects. So you can see that's the projects they're running for or with. You can also see House and Home. Here you can see they've been appointed for quite a few different House and Home projects. And this one is a live project currently, and this is what they do. Now, when they have a new site, renovation site, they will send me the cover page. I look at the cover page, I open a folder on documents, and I upload the cover page. Then I come to CMS, and I upload a CMS for that specific new project. So I upload, I'm not going to save this because we're not opening a project now, but for instance, here's the latest project we have opened already. So I will open this, and this is what they need to get to site immediately when they have everything that's required. If I get the specifications and I find out, say for instance, like the scissor lift, I will add the checklist, the checklist and the risk assessment for that specific equipment on that site. So this is a new project. As soon as I save this, it will actually open it. So if we go back to construction here, that's the one I have opened a couple of days ago. And you can see we have opened it too soon because these guys couldn't go back onto site, or they couldn't go to site last week. So that's why they have a non-compliance there already. We opened it too quickly. So that's a tip. You need to make sure that if you open a new project, the CMS date is set correctly. So it actually opens when they physically start on site and not when the site physically opens, because they might not start on site and then you have a failure, but it's not a real failure because the guys weren't there to do the checklists. Okay, and once you've actually uploaded your CMS, you must make sure that you now assign these checklists to that CMS. So you open the checklist. Sorry, let's just go to all checklists. and I go to, let's take the first one. I need to make sure I actually don't have stacking on any of them because they don't stack. Let's just take another one, hand tools. You need to select them for the sites that they're going to be active on. So come on, let's see, Bertha is active. So we've got hand tools for Bertha. We can say, okay, Western. I know Western, they've closed last week, so I can remove Western. Let's see, Sandbar. So we know Sandbar is the new one and we need to add that checklist. So you must make sure that if you open a project under CMS, that you actually link the CMS to the applicable checklist here. And once you've done that, you have to remove the old checklist as well, or the old CMSs. So once a project is finished, you have to close off that project, which I'll show you now how to do that. And then remove that CMS from your checklist. If you open a new project, you add the CMS to your checklist so that Elint knows that that specific checklist was done for that specific site. So let's just go back here. So we know that Western is finished. You can see Western, grinder inspection. I know the site is closed. Okay, now we can say Sandbar is the new site. Grinder inspection, there we go. I need to add grinder inspection. Add it. So we go to the next one. Grinder hand tool. Just want to fix this because otherwise we're going to have a problem where the system fails for Sandbar, and if they use these inspections. What do we have? Ladder. Okay. So I'm now just assigning this ladder to them, making sure, the CMS is to their checklist, making sure that the old checklist or the old CMS has been removed and the new site has been activated. I'm just going to go through all of them because this is something I'm just picking up now that I didn't do. Western, and we need to add Sandbar. Okay. If you don't do this and the user goes into checklist and he wants to complete the checklist, he won't have the option to actually select the site and he won't be able to complete these checklists. So this is a quite important step that needs to be done so that the guys know they need to do it. Let's see if I've got first aid box. And they can actually physically do it. Also under checklist, if you have a new user, so say for instance you've got a new supervisor on site or you have a new, let's see if I've got Carnival, a new person that you're going to use a checklist for, then what you need to do is you need to assign the checklist that he's responsible for to that person. So let's just check if Dean is let's see, first aid. Okay, so I've got Dean there. Fire extinguisher, I've got Dean there. Let's say grinder. Okay, I've got Dean there. So I've got my applicable users assigned to the checklist. But if you capture a new user, make sure if they're going to fill in checklist that you assign the checklist to them. Otherwise, they won't see the checklist. And make sure if you've got a CMS for a checklist that you actually go and link that CMS to the checklist and remove the old CMSs from the checklist so that the user, when they complete the checklist, can actually select that specific site. Let's go in here. So Western, we can remove. I want to show you what happens. Sandbar, we can add induction and toolbox talk. You will notice for my attendance register, I'm saying the attendance register, I want to use it for toolbox talks as well as induction. So it must be ticked for induction and toolbox talks, so that I know if I complete an attendance register, I can say I'm completing this attendance register for Sandbar and it's the induction I'm doing, or I'm completing it and it's for the toolbox talk that I'm doing it. And there you can see the different sites. Okay, so basically what we've done now is I've explained to you how to automate the whole file. If your CMS and your checklist is correctly linked, like I've just shown you, if the user uses his checklist on his phone, it will mark it off under monitoring and you will see that they are actually doing the work. Here you can see they're doing their specific work. If we go to House and Home, that Carnival, which is also an active site currently, you will see that Mark has done his work. Last Friday, he needs to do it still this Friday. And you can set it up in any way you want to. I mean, you can also set it up as daily if you want the checklist to be done as daily. Just be careful if you do that, because they do tend to miss 1 or 2 days a week for various reasons. Make sure that you have a reason why you want the daily. Legally, I would say grinders maybe daily, but hand tools specifically, that can even be monthly. Ladders can also be monthly, but because of construction sites, I like to do it at least weekly. So you can set it up the way you want to. And then once a site closes, you need to let the administrator know, because the administrator will have to go back into the back end and do the following. So if we go to Western, you will see, let's take one of those. So ladder inspection, we don't want Elint to run with the ladder inspection anymore. So I've put a closing date to ladder inspections. So we don't want that to continue running. So we've closed that off. Everything else on this specific project you'll see are closed off. Let's check the grinder. That's also closed off. So we put an end date to all the projects that's completed. That means my safety file for the project is still there, because I have my company safety file, which is all the company specific documentation. And then I have my Western folder, which is specific to that project, which would include their specific risk assessment. And then I have my checklists. If I go Western, there's all the specific checklists that was completed for Western, and you can see there's quite a few. It's 4 pages full of checklists that was completed that can be audited. But I can also go to monitoring and just say, well, I want to see how well did Western do. And I can say show. You remember we closed it off, so that's why these are not showing. Here's my completion record of that project, so I can see what they've done. And I am happy that it's there. They missed that week and they've never done a toolbox talk. If I go back to CMS, I should see the same type of record. So yes, there were non-conformances, non-compliances where they missed checklists. And these are actually, we closed the site off too late. So make sure that the guys understand they have to give you a date when they finished. They have to tell you. Otherwise, it's going to look like this. But the site is closed off, and they didn't. You've seen they didn't do the checklist in that 1 week and the toolbox talk. And then you can also depict this on your actual board. So this is the Berta site. You can see how compliant they are. This is compliance across the board with the different principal contractors they work with. And you can also see, if you look at this one that says Occupational Health and Safety Act, that means that's their file compliance, their generic, not generic, their company documentation compliance that we look at there. And then we can have a look and say that's Western against, and again, their own documentation that they have, their company documentation as well as the Western folder. And again, this is another client, house and home compliance. So all the different contractors for the different sites that they work in, they can see. And also they use the system for any injuries. So they had a knee injury this month, and that's why Western wasn't closed off correctly, because this is the manager that was injured. And he didn't let us know that he closed the site before he got injured. So the site was running without us knowing that it's actually handed over. But continual improvement, they raise a continual improvement whenever they have a problem or injury on site, or property damage, or audit findings, or customer complaints. That's all raised as continual improvements in the system. So you can see there, so that's the injury. And then obviously if there's any failures on the CMS, it will also raise a continual improvement. And then under tasks, if there's anything raised from the checklists, there's a task that will be raised to fix it. So say for instance, there's something wrong with a plug that needs to be replaced on a lead, something like that. They can raise it from the portable electrical equipment checklist to say the plug needs to be fixed, and it logs a task. This task was logged out of continual improvement for that injury, and it's a continual improvement that needs to be implemented on site. And it was done, but not fully yet. So there's some people that still needs to go through this toolbox talk. And that's how we automate the contractor health and safety file, and how we run multiple projects on different sites through one Elint site as one automated file in a secure place. If you have any concerns or want to discuss this further, please let us know. I'll leave the Elint's detail in the description bar. And then also we do have documentation, templates of checklists and templates of risk assessments and templates of CMSs to pull through that can be used to streamline the process and make it easier to start the process and have your file fully automated. This specific company's payback on using Elint was 6 weeks. Within 6 weeks, they paid less for health and safety management by using the system in this manner than what they have paid for just printing files and having files that they hardly ever completed. Thank you.